several. Rather than who I was most or am most frustrated with, let me address it in this manner. I'm frustrated with Nathaniel Banks. He's a political general, but he's been down in Texas and Louisiana there in that Trans Mississippi Theater. And I understand the president has him there as a buffer between the Confederacy and the French, because Napoleon III wants to come in and reestablish France as a world power. And he intends to do it by coming into the Confederacy, fighting with them, and taking Mexico and probably a good part of the Confederacy, or having influence. I asked him for troops when I went into the Vicksburg expedition, and I wanted 20,000 of his some 35,000. He deigned to offer me 10,000 if he could spare them. And the president told me I couldn't have any more than 10,000, and explained the issue with the French and so forth. And I got my first lesson in international politics. But Banks has not had a great deal of success, and has not been cooperative, as cooperative as he could. I'm frustrated with Franz Siegel in the Shenandoah Valley. Siegel goes down in there to get the Shenandoah and take away the breadbasket of the Confederacy and the supplies, everything they get, and they get substantial of both from the Shenandoah, and he winds up getting whipped by the VMI cadets. Now, there are two sides to that. One is they fought valiantly, and they fought well. They fought very well. Don't ever think of them as the boys from VMI. They might have been boys, but they acquitted themselves extremely well and defeated him with credit. On the other hand, they were evenly matched. Breckinridge led, I think it was Breckinridge led the VMI cadets and some of his troops, about 5,600, and Siegel had about 5,600, 6,000, and he gets whipped, and he doesn't accomplish the mission in the Shenandoah Valley. Ben Butler. I ain't happy with Ben Butler either, or Spoons. He hates it when I call him Spoons, but he really hates it when I pull out that chamber pot with his picture in the bottom of it. And I have too. But Butler was taking the army of the James down to help me in the Overland campaign around Petersburg. He could have gone into Petersburg and taken it when there were only 1,500 boys and men in the home guard. And he goes into camp. And he winds up getting the army of the James bottled up at Bermuda 100, and they're of no use to me. I'm frustrated with Governor Warren. Warren is a patriot and a fighter, but he wants to argue. He would argue with the fence post if it gave him an order. And when we give an order to move, he will not move his division. He will, after he's argued about getting the order and how to carry it out and what to do, when the movement is actually timed, he will look to his right and then to his left and see if his two flanking units are moving before he'll move. And that defeats the whole purpose. When you get an order, move when you are told to move. So I have some frustration with Warren. He may wind up getting himself replaced. He frustrates me with that. And it's a frustration in a frustration, because he's a good man and a good fighter if he just follow orders in a timely manner. So those are some of the people that frustrate me. They're all well-intentioned, some of them good leaders. I won't say which, but some of the frustrations. And that's where I will stop, because I do have to work with these men.
General Rich asked, General, please comment on your evaluation of and relationship with Captain Irving Carson, one of your scouts in Shiloh. Also, comment on the circumstances of his horrific death on 6 July 1862, when physically very near you, and the ensuing reactions of both the public and the military to the incident and reporting of it?
I can't address that because I don't recall enough about Carlson, and I dare not tread where I cannot tread with effectiveness. So your question is well taken, but I can't address it.
General Jerry asks, General, throughout your service as a Union officer during the war, what was the lowest point for you personally? And how about the highest point?
The lowest point for me was immediately the days immediately after Pittsburgh landing, when General Halleck arrived in camp on April the 11th, only the second time he was ever in the field. The president had sent him down. He was intent to come down and chat me pretty well, but the president put a leash on him. There were cries for my head. The mortality rate at Shiloh, the KIA killed and wounded rate was horrendous. An example being there were 23,746 men killed and wounded, or better, it should be about 19,000 men wounded. There were 4,000 men dead on the field at Shiloh. And that 23,746, that number sticks in my mind because it's more men that were killed and wounded in 36 hours at Shiloh than were killed and wounded in all three of the wars that America had been involved: the Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Mexican War. Because in all three of those wars combined, total killed and wounded was 23,215. So, and that was three wars, several years combined. But at Shiloh, 36 hours and 500 more men were killed and wounded than in all three of those wars. It was staggering. Cries for my head, who's responsible for this? My asthma floated over the field, as it always does in a horrific situation. The president held steadfast, though, because President Lincoln knew that it was not ineptitude on anybody's part, specifically mine. The numbers were staggering because there were more than 100,000 men who were engaged at Shiloh in those 2 days, over 30 square miles. With those large numbers, there were going to be large casualties. In it, of those 23,746, 40% of the households in America, and that's from Atlantic to Pacific, Mexico to Canada, 4 out of every 10 households in America had somebody killed or wounded at Shiloh. That's because this is a war of conviction, not a drafting war, a conscription war, at least not at this point, but it's every man is fighting for cause and country, patriotism, and principle. And all walks of life, not just the men that don't want to do anything else, the lowest to the highest in society. And because of that stacking of societal level strata, those numbers cut through every family nearly in the country. Halleck got on the scene there at Shiloh and effectively relieved me of command without relieving me of command. My lowest point in the war was when I thought my lowest point would have been after Fort Donelson, when I was effectively put under house arrest, told I was going to be court-martialed, that my papers were already completed, and give the command of my army, the Army of the Tennessee, to Charles Ferguson Smith, which I did. That was all done away with. And now here I am 8 weeks later, after surviving the Battle of Shiloh, and Halleck is on the field, and he took the armies of Ohio, the Army of Ohio, the Army of Tennessee, and rearranged them into 3 different corps, none of which I had command. Effectively, I had command of the Reserve Corps. And then he sent directive to all of the generals involved in the battle: do not send your after action report through General Grant, send them directly to me. That was a stunning blow. And I had nothing to do and all day to do it for several weeks. I wrote Julia a letter and said, I might as well be at the farthest reach of the limits of my command to do as much good as I am doing here. And I was going to resign. Sherman heard about it, came to my tent. He came in my tent and said a number of things to me that I cannot repeat. But essentially, he said, don't resign. You'll regret it. Ask for a change of location of your headquarters. Because remember, I'm still titular, title only, the commanding officer general for the Army of the Tennessee. And I can request another location for my headquarters. I did so, and Halleck, who was more than happy to see me leave, said, yes, get out of here. And I moved my headquarters to Memphis, Tennessee, and stayed there until July, about the 15th of July, 14th of July, when Halleck was promoted General in Chief and called me back to Shiloh. That was my lowest point. My highest point in the war would have been when I took the surrender of Pemberton at Vicksburg, and then perhaps a little higher in the order of emotion and feelings when the morning of March the 9th of 64, when President Lincoln handed me that piece of paper that says I was the Lieutenant General of the regular Army, the highest ranking officer in the United States Army. And I hearken back that was March the 9th of 1864. March the 9th of 1861, I was a clerk working for my father in Galena, Illinois, making $800 a year and paying off $800 in debts I'd run up in St. Louis. I paid more in debts that first year, 1860 to 61, than I made. And in 4 years, I had gone from working for my daddy to being the highest ranking officer in the United States Army, with command to come very shortly of all armies in the field, more than 500,000 men under my command. That was the highest point.
Thank you, General. Matthew says, General, were you planning a double envelopment at Shiloh with Nelson and Lew Wallace?
I wasn't planning anything at Shiloh with anybody. The issue with Shiloh is there are people who will tell you that I was surprised, and I will tell you I was not. I knew they were out there, but I thought it was a reconnaissance in force. They'd been all around the Army, punching and probing and geeking at us with the sharp stick, bands playing, firing their guns. We knew they were out there, but I didn't think it was the entire 44,000 men of the Confederate Army. I didn't think that Albert Sidney Johnston would leave a heavily entrenched position in Corinth, Mississippi, to come out and give me battle in the open field. I found out, though, on the morning of April the 6th that General Johnston had a distinctly different agenda than mine. I was expecting him, given the noise and unintended demonstrations from his army, that he was going to try to hit me on the 9th, maybe the 8th. And what I was trying to do was get Buell, who was dragging his sword. He's somebody else I was a little frustrated with. Buell was dragging his sword, getting from Columbia, Tennessee to Savannah, Tennessee, and join my army, cross the Tennessee to the west side of the river, and all of us, some 75, 80,000 strong, would march that 20 miles south to Corinth. And I thought, Johnston is not going to come out and hit me. I was wrong. Johnston was trying to soothe his ego from the loss of Donelson and Henry before that. Fort Henry lost the Tennessee and Donelson lost the Cumberland. So we had marched into Nashville via the Cumberland, and we had already sent gunboats as far as Chattanooga, nearly way west and east, rather, in Alabama. And it was a death knell for the Confederacy. People were calling for Johnston's head. They were saying, is he a general? And President Davis said, well, if General Johnston is not a general, then we have no general. I never shared that high an estimation of Johnston. He was supposed to be a brilliant leader, and he never showed that to me at all. My impression of General Johnston was he's a good man, a man of character. But being the general he was cracked up to be, he never showed me. The double envelopment, I had Buell and I had Wallace. Well, I had Wallace at the end of the first day. Wallace was at Crump's Landing, 5 miles north of Pittsburgh Landing. I thought if they hit us at all, they were going to come around Pittsburgh Landing, Owl Creek, Snake Creek, Lick Creek, the Tennessee, all running into the Tennessee, and attack my supply depot where everything was being stored. So I kept about 6,500 men under Lew Wallace there with the strict orders. And of course, anyone who's been in the military will know there's no such thing as a strict order. I say that for emphasis, that if I need you, come down by the nearest road. There was a river road that ran parallel to the Tennessee, short march. We had, in fact, cut another road that went back to the west away from the Tennessee River. And in fact, his troops had helped build the bridge across, I think it was Lick Creek, I believe, to get there from a more roundabout way. And that all got all confused, and I'm still wondering what happened there. But I had planned no envelopment with Wallace. Bull Nelson had gotten there, and I'd moved him down from Savannah down to across the river from Pittsburgh Landing with the preparations to move across the river. The Navy was a tremendous help to me, Captain Shirk and Gwynn, the Lexington and the Tigris moving troops across. So I had planned no envelopment with them. And when they hit us at about 5 o'clock in the morning in Fraley's Field, they began rolling us up all the way back to the Tennessee River, almost 3 miles. I would like to tell you that I had planned a great deal for that, but I had not planned for that. For me, Shiloh is a battle that should never have happened. And I think historically, it's the tail that wags the dog, because you have to remember it was one of 4 battles in the Crossroads campaign, the Crossroads at Corinth, because you had Shiloh. Later, you had the Battle of Iuka. You had and after Shiloh, you had the Hatchie Bridge, or after the Battle of Corinth, you had the Hatchie Bridge. So you got Shiloh, you got Iuka, you got the Battle of Corinth in October, and the 3rd and 4th, and on the 5th, the Hatchie Bridge. All in all, there were 4 battles fought to secure for federal control that crossroads at Corinth, Mississippi. 16 square feet of steel rail. 10,000 men died, and about 50,000 total suffered wounded for those 2 railroads, Mobile and Ohio North, Memphis and Charleston, East and West. So I didn't plan to have a battle there. As soon as Buell got across the river, we were marching south 20 miles and attacked Corinth. But as I said, General Johnston had a different agenda, and he also wanted to hit me when I had 37,000 men there at Pittsburgh Landing, and he had 44,000. If he had waited until Buell finally got there and joined my army, the Army of the Ohio joined the Army of the Tennessee, we'd have had about 75,000 men and outnumbered Johnston by about 2 to 1, and he didn't want to wait for that. So in finishing up, I would say I would love to tell you that I'd planned to do anything with anybody at Shiloh. I had not planned to do anything with anybody at Shiloh.
Vicky asks, General, when did you carry a weapon or a sword? And did you ever use your weapon against the enemy?
That may get the shoulder straps for the night. Yeah, I am frequently asked about what weapon I carried. I did not carry a weapon. I did not carry a weapon. my favorite weapon was a 36 caliber model 1851 Navy Colt. That's my favorite weapon, but I don't carry one. I've got pistols in my saddle holsters, uh, but they're taken out occasionally and cleaned. I never use them. I am always surrounded by, if not the entire Army, a staff of troopers who are most effective at what they do. And I have no need to carry a pistol. But as I said, my favorite is a 36 caliber 1851 Navy Colt. A sword, I don't carry a sword. Now, I did carry a sword up into Shiloh. I had one around until Shiloh because I had risen in rank and I felt that I should have my symbols of authority. But I never liked carrying a sword. They just bruised my leg and they bothered the horse. But I was carrying one at Shiloh. Now, on the second day at Shiloh, Lieutenant Colonel McPherson and I don't recall his name, my commissary colonel and myself were riding through a road to a clearing about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the 7th, and we saw no one in the field, and we proceeded to cross it, and then the woods lit up with musket fire at us. It was full of Rebs. We put the spurs to our horses, and it wasted no time getting into the woods we were heading for, short ride. When we got in the woods, the commissary officer had lost his hat. He did not go back to retrieve it. McPherson had his horse started breathing in a labored manner, and he took a ball through and through right behind the saddle, very close to the type of shot that killed Sidney Johnston. But it went all the way through the horse, staggered and fell dead. And I noticed that I had taken a ball, apparently a spent ball, had hit me down on my left side, and the ball had hit the scabbard just below the pommel of the sword. And it had ripped the metal, scabbard, blade, and all, almost completely severed. And within just a few minutes, the blade, scabbard, and all broke loose and fell off. So at the end of the day, I had only the handle, no sword. I didn't carry a sword again until the night of May the 4th into the morning of May the 5th of 64, when we crossed the Rapidan. I had 125,000 men crossing 7 bridges, 5 of them pontoon bridges. And I put on my best uniform, buttoned up to the collar with a sash and a sword, because many of those men had never seen me. And I put myself on a promontory next to one of the trails going to a bridge, because I wanted my men to see me, the man whose orders they were following. And after that, I didn't carry a sword the rest of the war. I didn't have one when I met Lee for the surrender, but no pistol, never carried a pistol, didn't carry a sword, didn't like a sword, don't like a sword. They're a bother. And that is that.
General John says, good evening, General Grant. My 2 times great grandfather served in the 151st Illinois Volunteer Infantry. He was captured and sent to Andersonville. Can you speak about the Union policy of prisoner exchange during the war?
Indeed, I am criticized and indeed condemned for stopping prisoner exchanges. I did not. President Lincoln in 62 stopped the prisoner exchanges, and late 62. And he stopped the prisoner exchanges because the Confederates had made it clear that black soldiers, if there were any black soldiers, they weren't in the ranks at that time, but some free men had gone into the ranks. But the slaves, which is what the Confederates were aiming at, were not yet emancipated until January 1st of 63. But the Confederates had made a policy statement that any black soldiers captured were going to, if they didn't kill them on the spot, hang them on the spot, they were going to be sent back into slavery. And President Lincoln said, you'll treat them as soldiers, as prisoners of war, as according to the Lieber Code, some 200 different items in the Lieber Code that was developed and at that time. And if you're not going to treat all of our soldiers as prisoners of war, we're not going to exchange prisoners of war. And he stopped that. And understandably, the prison camps began to fill. I was opposed to prisoner exchanges as well. I do not intend to put it off on President Lincoln. I supported President Lincoln's ban on prisoner exchanges because I strongly feel that every man that we can take out of the field, he needs to be kept out of the field. And prisoner exchanges only release Confederate soldiers to return to the battlefield, and we have to fight him again. And I didn't like that, even though, and I am not insensitive to the issue that the opposite is, we have federal soldiers who are languishing in prison camps, and they are horror stories, as I understand. And I regret that. I do not mean to have disdainful attitude or tone about that. I don't want our men suffering, but we can't let those Confederate soldiers get back in the field. But President Lincoln started it, and I heartily supported stopping prisoner exchanges.
General Richard says, when first in Missouri and going up a hill and expecting to meet the Confederates on the other side, you said you did not have the moral courage to pause and consider what to do. What did you mean by moral courage?
I meant that I couldn't steel myself to spur my horse and rein him and go in the other direction. That the only thing that I could do was to continue to ride my horse and lead my soldiers to the edge of that riverbank and meet Colonel Harris, who was, I expected to be on the other side at the bottom of that ravine. It would have taken courage to overcome the fear that I felt. And I understand that is an oxymoron of opposites, but it would have taken courage to have said, no, I'm not going to do this, even though I was terrified of what was about to happen. So that's what I meant. Those were my feelings at that time. And I kept on going. I had no thought but to keep going.
General Frank asks, how do you feel General Pemberton would have fit in with the Federal Army? And what do you feel about his military abilities?
John Clifford Pemberton is a good man. I know him. I knew him during the Mexican War. In fact, one of the two times that I was praised by General Scott for bravery, that in the San Cosmo church, when I put the mountain howitzer in the bell tower, San Cosme Convento, which is another story in itself. Lieutenant Pemberton is the man sent to give me General Scott's compliments and praise. John Pemberton is a good man, and I like him. My assessment of him is he's a really good engineer, and he's a very good administrator. He's not a combat commander, and I knew that. And he never worried me as in meeting him on the field until I could get him pinned against the river in Vicksburg. His military service is good and not lacking in any way. He's from Philadelphia. In fact, he and George Meade and George McClellan were playmates growing up in the same area in Philadelphia. And he married a girl from Virginia and had done a good bit of service time in the South and came to very much like the people of the South. And his wife was a Virginian, and she, it's not like an Eve tempting Adam, I don't mean to say that she persuaded him to come to the South, but he chose to go with the South, cast his lot with the South. And I think that is regrettable, but that would be my opinion of John Pemberton.
All right, General. Rena says, regarding your management of the Army of the Potomac during what has become known as the Overland Campaign, what, if anything, in retrospect, would you have done differently? I'm thinking in particular about Cold Harbor after the near breakthrough of the enemy lines on June 1st, but then there were delays and a serious lack of coordination that made the June 3rd assault ineffective.
I wouldn't do anything differently. Even in retrospect, I regret the decision for the attack at Cold Harbor on the morning of June 3rd. I do regret that, as I do the charge at Vicksburg on May 22nd of 62. But I ordered the attack at Cold Harbor because of the same reasoning that General Lee ordered the attack of Pickett at Gettysburg. You see, General Lee, in stating it in this manner, you can generalize to what I was thinking at Cold Harbor. After a tremendous fight, General Lee thought that he could take Pickett's army and charge across that field like a huge spear and penetrate the center of the Federal line, where when the thinking began, it was the weakest. He did not know that overnight that point had been strengthened and hardened. He thought that the Federals were fought out and worn out and morally broken, and that would be the opportunity to penetrate the Union lines, punch them, separate them, and defeat them in detail. I thought the same things in a different locality. By the time we'd fought for 40 days plus and boiled all over Virginia, battle after battle after yet battle, by the time we got to Cold Harbor, I thought that the Confederate soldiers were fought out. I know my soldiers were verging on exhaustion, and I knew they had to be the same and possibly worse. I thought that they were morally broken down because their casualties had been horrendous, as had ours, but their ranks were even more decimated than ours because we started that campaign with 125,000 men. They were 60,000, maybe 65,000. It depends on whose numbers you're reading. But they had about half the number we did, and they'd been suffering higher casualties than we had for 40 days. And I thought, this is the time to overwhelm them. And I thought ordering approximately 50,000 men in a blue flood across that field would overwhelm them. So thinking they were fought out, worn out, mentally beaten, physically exhausted, to hit them with that kind of force in that location there would break their lines. And I was wrong. They were not morally worn out. They were physically exhausted, but there was still plenty of fight. I regret the decision. Would I do anything differently? Of course, that's impossible to say, but I don't think I would. My own feeling is I would order it again. Given what I knew at the time of the circumstances, I would order that again for the same reasons. Now, the campaign leading up to that had been a bloodbath and horror beyond horror. But that's why President Lincoln had named me to be Lieutenant General and General-in-Chief, commanding all of the federal armies, because he knew that I was not going to fall back across the river after I had engaged Lee, as had everyone who'd commanded the Army of the Potomac. and it reads like a laundry list of who all had been in command. And remember, I wasn't in command of the Army of the Potomac. I was in command of 5 different armies, more than 500,000 men, from Ben Butler, although he is bottled up at Bermuda 100, to Franz Sigel originally in the Shenandoah Valley, Sherman down in Atlanta into the Carolinas, Nathaniel Banks out there in Texas and Louisiana. I'm commanding all of those armies and having to coordinate all of them, as well as with the Army of the Potomac. So I had a lot on my mind, but Lincoln knew that I would attack and keep attacking. And that's what he wanted. President Lincoln knew that the casualty numbers were going to be high. I don't think he had a grip on exactly how high they were going to be. But my approach was going to be to grab Lee by the throat and hold him in that grip until either I whipped him or he whipped me. And those are my thoughts and my approach to commanding the armies and traveling with the Army of the Potomac, and what we engaged in what originally was the Overland Campaign, ultimately resulting in Petersburg and then the surrender.
General Daz, who is in the UK, said, please tell me about your relationship with Henry Halleck leading up to and after Shiloh.
Daz, welcome. It is good to have you join us from the United Kingdom. And I must tell you, our hearts go out to you for the loss of Prince Philip. To slip time a little bit, the America and Britain have been back to back and side by side for a lot in our history, ever since we cleared up that little matter of the War of 1812. But ever since then, we have been back to back and side by side as allies. And the loss of Prince Philip is a devastating one. My heart goes out to you. Now, my relationship, tell me the question again.
Your relationship with General Halleck.
Oh, I had a good relationship, I thought, with Henry Wager Halleck, old brains. I'm beginning to find out that it wasn't as good as I thought it was here in 1865. Beginning to hear some things under my tent flap here with the Army that disturbed me. I know going back to my command of the District of Mississippi with headquarters in Cairo back in late 61, after Fremont had been replaced by Halleck, I wanted to go for Fort Hyman and Fort Donelson, and I proposed that to him. Well, he said he didn't want to hear it via the telegraph. I asked permission to go to St. Louis and present it myself. He grudgingly, I think, accepted. I went to St. Louis and began to lay out my plan, and he said, "That's quite enough, General, you may leave." Caught me in mid-sentence. I thought I'd said something unmilitary. And he said, "You may return to your command immediately." And out the door. But when Admiral Foote, at that time Flag Officer Foote, proposed the same idea to General Halleck, he went for it, approved it, and we took Hyman, then we took Donelson, and the march was on. He relieved me of command right after Fort Donelson. Asked me, "Why don't you respond to your telegrams?" Well, I'd been responding. A rebel telegrapher had gotten between me and him and was intercepting messages and sending bogus messages. And I'd been performing my daily duties, but I found out, he told General McClellan, who was then General-in-Chief, that I'd fallen back into my old habits, which mean I've been drunk again, which was not the truth. He sends me a telegram that says, "I've got orders from Washington to look into your dereliction of duty and your personal habits, and there's even a hint of a court-martial." And of course, I found out since then that was all completely fiction. There'd been no orders from Washington to look into anything about me. In fact, the only thing he got from Washington was a telegram from the Secretary of War through the Adjutant General that President Lincoln wants to know exactly what General Grant did, exactly what he did, and exactly when he did it to warrant being court-martialed. And that's when Halleck, throw those hands up and says, oh, that's a nasty rumor, Mr. President. That's all been worked out. Sends me a telegram that says, your matter has been satisfactorily cleared up. And you are hereby returned to command. And I look forward to enjoying many more glorious victories with you in the future. And I have since found out he was the author of all of those problems. When he came down to Shiloh just a few weeks later and took command and took away my command without officially taking away my command. See, he learned his lesson back at Donelson. If he whacked me upside the head too hard, the president wouldn't like it. So what he did was underhanded and a roundabout, and he relieved me of command by telling everybody that was under my command, don't send anything to General Grant, send all your information directly to me. And he puts me out in the field somewhere, figuratively speaking, with no command at all, which prompts me to tell you that Shiloh is the only major battle in the war where one of the commanding officers did not write an after-action report. I did not write an after-action report for the Battle of Shiloh. The only thing I wrote about Shiloh was when the battle was over, I sent a 2-page letter to St. Louis that said, we've had a battle, we have prevailed. But when General Halleck in July of '62 was called to Washington City to become the general-in-chief, he called me back to Corinth from Memphis and said, write an after-action report. And I said, I will not do that. He had apoplexy. And he asked me, well, why won't you? And I said, because you directed my subordinate officers to reroute their information away from me, specifically saying, do not send your information to General Grant, send them directly to me. I cannot and I will not write a report based on information that I never saw. And General Halleck swallowed real hard at that and let the matter be. Because if he charged me with insubordination as he wanted to do, all of this would have come out in a court of inquiry. And he didn't want any of what he'd done to be lifted to light for public view. And that's not even mentioning, let me see, President Lincoln finding out that he'd kind of been underhanded with me. So he let it go, and Shiloh remains the only battle in the war that one of the commanding officers did not write an after-action report. I think General Halleck is an extremely intelligent man, the old brain sobriquet that he has. He studied law, became a successful lawyer in California while he's still in the Army, and then gets back into command, has done very well. So I'd like to think I have a good relationship with him, but that remains to be seen. We'll find out maybe more later.
Laura asks, where were you when Lincoln was assassinated, and how did you get the news?
I was on a train to Long Branch, New Jersey, Burlington, New Jersey. I'm sorry, it's Burlington. I was on a train to Burlington, New Jersey. Now, what had happened was, let me back up a bit. That morning, President Lincoln, when I was at the Executive Mansion, had invited Julia and myself to attend and extended a special command performance of Our American Cousin. And I said, well, I need to check with Julia, Mr. President. He laughed. He said, smart man. So I go home and I told Julia, and she said, no, absolutely not. I will not spend another minute with that woman. You go back and tell the president you're going to Burlington, New Jersey, and see our children. We haven't seen them in quite some time. And I did. So we were on a train for Burlington, New Jersey, and it was heavily armed. While we were on the train, I was a knock on the door, and one of the guards, when I answered it, well, one of the guards answered the knock. Another guard gave him a letter, and it was an unsigned letter from somebody on the train that said they were going to kill me and Julia. Well, we had guards at each end of the train and a guard in our private car. So I had a heavy armed guard with me, as I did at all times. And I got the message. The train stopped unexpectedly. It was unscheduled stop, and knock on the door. And a Pinkerton man, as I recall, came in, and they called me into the telegraph office in the train station, and I was given the awful news that the president had been shot and was not expected to live, and that I was to return immediately to Washington, and there were some other soldiers that were dispatched there waiting for me, and I said, well, I'm so close to Burlington now that there's no need for me to turn around and go back. I went on to Burlington, deposited Julia with the children, and caught the next train and rode through the night to get back to Washington City. And there'd been very mysterious circumstances all that day anyway. But that's why I was not with the president, and where I was and how I received the information. And I shall always regret that I had turned down that invitation, because it is my firm feeling that had I been with President Lincoln, he would not have been assassinated.
General Dave asks, I'm interested in knowing more about your negotiation with Nashville and their capitulation. I understand the city surrendered to Union officers before your arrival.
Yes, yes. After Donelson fell, a couple of things happened. Just a day or two after Donelson fell, here comes Bull Nelson with 6,000 or 7,000 men. He'd been dispatched, as I recall, by Halleck to reinforce me in case I needed help at Donelson. Well, Donelson had already fallen, and I had, in the meantime, between Donelson falling, Buckner surrendering, and the arrival of Bull Nelson, I had telegraphed to General Buell, who was, as I recall, northeast of Nashville, approaching it, and had surrounded Nashville on the north side of the Cumberland River, that to go in and take Nashville, because it was a significant rail hub and filled to the rafters with trains, and loaded, all those trains were loaded with materiel and supplies, and I wanted them before the Confederates could evacuate them. Well, Nelson didn't want to attack. When Buell didn't want to attack, I had moved to Clarksville, Tennessee, just a few miles up the Cumberland River toward Nashville, and had stopped there. In fact, Halleck had ordered me to stop there. I've got Flag Officer Foote, and he's got several of his ironclads and timberclads there, and Foote wants to move on Nashville as well. So I'm told, hold in place at Clarksville. Foote, he had apoplexy over that. He's a fighter. He's a dedicated fighter, and he wanted to sail into Nashville and open fire if they didn't surrender. And he said, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. General Smith, Charles Ferguson Smith, was ordered to hold at Clarksville. And this is only 10, 15 miles from Nashville. It's a short walk to get to Nashville. And he was ordered to stay there. He's furious and livid. When Bull Nelson got there, I sent him into Nashville, because I wasn't under any orders about keep Nelson there. So I sent Nelson into Nashville a day ahead of what I did. The next day, I telegraphed Halleck and said, if I don't hear anything to the contrary, I'm going into Nashville to see what I need to find out, whatever I may. And I didn't hear anything to the contrary. Remember, I've got that rebel telegrapher between me and St. Louis. So I went into Nashville. Well, as it turns out, the city of Nashville had surrendered to Bull Nelson. The mayor and the board of aldermen, they threw their hands up and said, "We give up. We give up. Don't attack us," because they didn't want the city destroyed. The city was lost and they knew it. Nathan Bedford Forrest, Colonel Forrest, has been dispatched by General Johnston to go to Nashville and get all of those trains out of the city, and what he couldn't get out to take the supplies off the trains, and what he couldn't get off the trains, blow up and burn the trains. The mayor and board of aldermen, the first blue coat they saw, they ran out with their hands up and surrendered to Bull Nelson. I got to Nashville and found that out, I think, on the 25th of February. So I get into Nashville and find out that Nelson's taking their surrender. And Nelson is saying, "Well, yeah, I guess certainly I'll take your surrender if you want to give up." And I went to looking for Buell, spent the day in Nashville, couldn't find him, sent messages. And he said, "You can find me here or there." And I said, "You may find me here in Nashville." See, I was his commanding officer at that time, and told him where you may find me. But the other issue here is to parallel with me sending Nelson into Nashville, and he took the surrender. I didn't anticipate him taking the surrender of the mayor, but I was very pleased. Buell, Don Carlos Buell, is across the Cumberland River on the north side at Edgefield, Tennessee, little town on the edge of the river. He stopped there, and he refused to cross the Cumberland River and go into Nashville, because if he had done that, the moment his boot set foot on the bank on the south side of the Cumberland, he'd have been under my command. And he was an Army commander commanding the Army of the Ohio. He had also been my superior in the old Army, and he felt he was still my superior in this Army. And he was in no hurry to go across that river and take that surrender, because he'd be under my command. So what happened was that he had the mayor and board of aldermen for the city of Nashville row across the river to surrender to him on the north side of the Cumberland River. Petty, petty, petty. I was telling him, attack, come into Nashville and attack Nashville and take these rail yards. He said, "I can't do that. Don't you hear that artillery?" And I said, "General Buell, that is not artillery. That's Bedford Forrest blowing up the ammunition. He's destroying everything that he can't carry with him. Move into Nashville and take this city." And he wouldn't do it. He didn't move in until I left. And I went back to Clarksville, and I'm told immediately, place yourself under arrest and give your command to General Smith and send him to Pittsburgh Landing. So that's what happened with all of that with Nashville. We ultimately did get Nashville, but from my point of view, only by the hardest.
General Rex says, were you aware the 13th North Carolina battle flag was the first captured upon your first flag captured upon your first battle in the East at the Wilderness? Stephen Ruft, 22 of the 141st Pennsylvania, received a Congressional Medal of Honor for his work.
I recall the incident, but no specifics. I was very pleased with it, of course, and very pleased for him to get that new medal that the Army's giving, or the government's giving.
Sam says, on the morning of 25 March 1865, when there was to be a corps review of troops to be presented for you and Mr. Lincoln at City Point, there was a bit of commotion at Fort Stedman during the siege of Petersburg. Brigadier General John Hartranft, 9th Ninth Corps became an acting commander in that sector, and Major General Park was at City Point with you for the review. Do you have any reminiscence of General Hartranft's service with you at North Anna, Cold Harbor, and or Petersburg?
He did well, or I don't recall specifics, but he did well, or he wouldn't have been at Stedman in the position he was in. Stedman was the beginning, could easily be said, the beginning of the end for Lee at Petersburg. I had ordered for March 29th an attack all along the lines. We had 37 miles of trenches, and some places in those trenches, men were 50 feet apart. I had finally stretched Lee to the breaking point, and this had to end, and I had ordered that attack. Lee knew this, and he tried to break out, and initially at Fort Stedman was successful, captured a number of federal soldiers because he really caught them flat-footed by surprise. And but the breach, and he penetrated deeply into our lines, but the breach was quickly healed and he was pushed back. General Hartranft did well indeed there, but he had done well in, as I recall, in all of his performances. But I can't be more specific than that.
Sam indicates that Hartranft was his maternal great-grandfather.
How proud you must be.
Indeed. Gotta find my place here. Right. Peter says, how do you feel regarding the publicity that Robert E. Lee gets over you?
Oh, I don't think much about it. I think, I do think that General Lee is a man who needs the sunshine. He needs the sunshine, and I'm glad that he gets that. I don't need any praise. Throughout the war, the many times that I was accused of being a drunk, laid out drunk, or inept, after Shiloh, for example, and the whisperings, and then the shouting about my being court-martialed at Donelson. All of those times, my wife, Julia, was incensed. My father is writing people and putting articles in the local papers there in Bethel, Ohio, and Covington, Kentucky. I finally had to tell him, stop writing things to the newspaper. I have enough troubles in the press without you adding fuel to an already burning fire. So leave it alone, Father. I told Julia, don't pay any attention to that. That's jealous people who are trying to do me damage. So pay it no attention. And for the most part, I paid it no attention. Perhaps people say I've got a thick skin. I don't think that's the case. I just don't pay any attention. I do my job. I do what I think is best, and whatever people say about it, well, they've got to live with that. General Lee getting praise. I think General Lee is due a great deal of praise. He is the god of war. He and I are such opposites, not only in who gets press coverage and who doesn't. He's tall and statuesque. I am not. He was born to be a soldier. I was not. All he ever wanted to do in his life was be a soldier. I didn't want anything at all to do with being a soldier. So we are just polar opposites in so many ways. So it's all right with me if he gets positive news coverage, and I hope he can get all he can get. Maybe it'll help assuage the sting of the loss of the war. So that would be the scope of my feelings about General Lee getting press over myself.
Glenn says, General, what do you think of General George Thomas as a military man? He seems to be underappreciated and doesn't get the recognition he deserves.
I think that you are correct that he is underappreciated. I think George Thomas is a fine man personally. I think he is a superior commanding officer. He is one of the few of us who stayed in the Army throughout the years after the Mexican War. He is a professional, committed soldier, and he is known as Old Pap, his nickname. He's got two nicknames, Slow Trot and Old Pap or Pappy Thomas. He got the nickname Slow Trot because he was commanding after we graduated. He was doing cavalry training at the academy, and they were getting such nags that he, instead of wearing them out any more than necessary, he would always say at the trot slow. So that you can imagine that becomes a pretty easy handle for people to whack him over the head. But it was always meant affectionately. He cared very deeply about his men and husbanded his men. He did not submit them to peril, put them in harm's way unless it was absolutely necessary. And they knew that. And they called him Old Pappy Thomas. He is a very deliberate man. Now, that's often mistaken by hesitant or reluctant. And hesitant or reluctant cannot be applied to George Thomas. Determined and careful are the terms to apply to George Thomas. Something that too many people don't know, he is a native Virginian who did not go south. And his sisters and family ever after that he stayed north, did not go south, declined a commission in the Confederate Army, they turned his picture to the wall and said, "We don't have a brother. I don't know who you're talking about." And I would point out that they turned his picture to the wall. They didn't take his picture and put it in a drawer where it's out of sight. They were so angry, they wanted to be reminded that he stayed north. So the back of his picture frame is on the wall. As a constant reminder, he stayed north and didn't come south like he should have, was their feeling. So he suffered personally with his family for his devotion to our country and his own patriotism. I think he is underappreciated. Now, I did get a little outdone with him there in November of '64 when I wanted, in December of '64, the Battle of Nashville, when I wanted him to attack Hood, and he wouldn't do it. And I prodded him again. He wouldn't do it. I'll do it when I'm ready. And I had actually sent Blackjack Logan, John Logan, to Nashville to replace him because Thomas had told me, "If you don't like the way I'm doing this, relieve me." And that was the wrong thing to say to me. And I said, "I can do that. I can do that, General." So I put Blackjack Logan on a train south and with orders to relieve Thomas as the commander of that army. But before Logan got there, he actually got to about Indianapolis and he saw a headline that Thomas had attacked when the weather had cleared enough to attack and had defeated Hood, destroyed Hood. I said nothing else about the matter. I think George is underappreciated. I should like to see him receive much more attention. Would be well deserved.
Frank asks, General, could you possibly comment on Colonel Reuben Hatch of the 8th Illinois and his lumber dealings as a quartermaster?
He was a crook. Would you care for me to comment more? Do I need to say any more? He was a crook. One of the I heard one of the soldiers, as I said, everything that's said in the camp, in the Army, comes under my tent flap. I hear it all. You know, rumors are like rats scurrying around in a dark warehouse. You hear them rustling, but you never see them. Well, that commentary came under my tent flap about what Hatch was doing with the lumber dealings, and that was just one of a multitude of crooked dealings Hatch was involved in. And I had relieved him of command. In fact, at one time I put him under arrest, but one of my soldiers has said that he was so crooked that when he dies, they're going to have to screw him into the ground. And I think that is the case with Reuben Hatch. he would climb a tree and do wrong before he'd stand on the ground and do right. Look into the Sultana. Yes, he's got some relationship even with the Sultana disaster. And just one debacle after another. And he'd been doing some dirty dealing, kickbacks with lumber dealers to deliver wood to our camps for our construction needs, and was getting very wealthy off of that. I got wind of it and sent someone into Chicago to look into it. And he tried to cover his tracks, but he didn't. But he has a friend that is a real friend. President Lincoln likes him. And President Lincoln keeps pulling his fat out of the fire. But he's a crook, and I think he is a crook. 4 words summarize Reuben Hatch.
All right.
He will come to an ill end.
General Roger asks, is it true that General Sherman had no idea that you were coming to Raleigh on April 24th to discuss the surrender he offered to General Joe Johnston?
It is true. Sherman had no idea that I was going there. You see, he couldn't, because I was sent there to tell him that the surrender that he had negotiated with Joe Johnston was not acceptable, even though essentially it was the same thing I had given Lee. The difference was the president is now dead, and the radical Republicans have control of Congress, both houses, and they weren't accepting what Sherman had negotiated. In fact, I think Charles Sumner publicly called Sherman a traitor. And the president told me, you've got to go and tell Sherman that this is not acceptable, negotiate another treaty. And the only way to have told Sherman I was coming would have been to telegraph it. And the telegraph might as well be called the teleblab. And everyone in North Carolina would have known that General Grant is coming to see Sherman. And people always default to the low road instead of the high road. And the rumors would have been thicker than mosquitoes in the Everglades. And it would have been an embarrassment to Sherman. So I took a private train and went to North Carolina and did not leave the train for a long time. I had Sherman brought to me, and we met on my private train.
General Frank asks, would you also comment on General Frederick Steele?
Good man, but I beyond that, I'm not knowledgeable enough about Steele and his background to address him.
Sharon asks, General, when you came east, what were your first impressions of the Army of the Potomac?
I don't want to be here. That would be my first impression. I had told Sherman when I left Nashville to go to accept the commission from the president that I will be back in just a few days. I am not going to have a headquarters in Washington City, that circus, under any circumstances. I do not plan to stay in the Eastern Theater. Since I will be in command of all armies, I will maintain a command in either Louisville or Nashville. Well, it didn't take but a couple of days up there with the president, and he prevailed upon me that he wanted me in the field, or he wanted me in the Eastern Theater. And I told him I would not stay in a desk position in an office in Washington City. I would travel with or near the Army of the Potomac. I also saw that I had to be in command there because a lesser man might be knuckling under to the trading politicians. My impression of the Army of the Potomac was that they looked great. I thought, and I came to feel very strongly that because of the leadership that they had had for those 3 years, they were conditioned to defeat. And I have my concerns, my doubts that they ever really got over that. They were of a mentality that you train, you fit, you equip. They were a beautiful fighting unit. McClellan made them a just a stunning spectacle of an army, but he wouldn't fight them, and they wanted to fight. But I thought that they were magnificent in appearance, looked totally different from the Western soldier, totally different in appearance, in bearing, in manner. It was two distinctly different armies. I knew that they could fight if they had the right leadership, and my dread was that I didn't know the leadership in the Army of the Potomac. Now, in the Army in the Western Theater, I knew men pretty much down to the regimental level who could do what, who could not do what, their strengths or their talents, weaknesses, and could put the right man in the right job. I had no knowledge of that. And I got the command on March the 9th, and the president wanted me to move as quickly as I could move that army against Lee. Now, getting to know my command leadership was tantamount to Hercules cleaning the Aegean stables, and I was overwhelmed. So I went out to visit. I started with a set two with Secretary Stanton and with Meade. I met Meade the next day on the 10th, and he gave me a letter of resignation and said, I expect you want somebody of your own choosing, perhaps Sherman. I gave the letter back to him and said, George, if I wanted somebody else in command of this army, he would already be here. It's your army. You whipped Lee at Gettysburg. You will stay in command. I also did not say, but felt very strongly, your stock with me, George Meade, just went up tremendously, because it took courage for that man to steel himself to give me his letter of resignation, fully expecting me to accept it. I kept him in command. I will point out, though, that by the 1st of April of the next year of 65, I had replaced every general in a commanding position in the Army of the Potomac except George Meade. I had removed every one of them, and replaced them with somebody of my choosing, except George. I kept George there. I had to get to know my command structure, and I knew that it would be an in the saddle task. And I never fully became as familiar with my leadership as possible. Now, the men were favorably inclined to me. They would make jokes and they always made jokes where they knew I could hear what they said. That night, going in May the 4th and 5th, going across the Rapidan River, I was sitting on that promontory with Elihu Washburn next to me, my congressman from Illinois, and he had on his black suit. And as they marched past me, one of them said, well, there sits General Grant himself. And another one yelled and replied, yeah, and he brought his own damned undertaker with him. And we had a little chuckle there. Ted Bowers, the Lieutenant Colonel Bowers, Theodore Bowers, he is the fellow who said that I looked like I could put my head through a brick wall and was about to do it. He said that in a letter home to his wife. He was also there and made some comments. He said, wouldn't it be interesting if every man who was going to be killed or wounded in this upcoming campaign had some sort of badge on his breast to indicate who was not going to survive this campaign? And as it turned out, it would have been 50% of the men walking past me. One of those soldiers, I think a Wisconsin soldier, when I wheeled south and out of the wilderness, he rode. He was wounded on the side of the road, not badly, because as I rode by, he yelled, "Ulysses S. Grant don't scare worth a damn." And I chuckled and I kept on moving. I took note of it. The men were favorably inclined. The command staff, I think, ultimately came to accept my command. But my initial impression was a bit like Pharaoh in the Red Sea when Moses called the water back in over him.
All right. General, we are out of time.
Oh, I regret that.
And looking at the chat feature, we have 29 more questions. Ladies and gentlemen, my question to you is: do you want to see this at a later date, the same format? And if you do, on the Zoom window, there is a smiley face underneath that says reactions. If you could give me a heart, a thumbs up, or an applause, or raise your hand like that. Would you like to see this this format again? Wow. Apparently not, General. So. No, it looks very overwhelming. I'm very very gratified, and I'm certain that you are gratified as well.
Deeply, I thoroughly enjoyed this.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you will please jot down your question, or at least in shorthand, so you can ask it once again, and in terms of Mark. Maybe he would give us a thumbs up because he is the hand.
Yes, the hand. That's a thumbs up would be most appropriate from the hand.
All right. So thank you so very much, General, for being with us tonight and answering all of the questions that you were posed. And ladies and gentlemen, we will do this again in about 2 weeks. So please bear with us. And we will see you then. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.